Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to Digital Ship Webinars. We continue producing weekly webinars and promise you to bring even more interesting knowledge to light on maritime IT and vessel performance all the way up to spring. In today's webinar, we're looking at how we are advancing in using digitalization, more specifically managing marine cargoes and vessel scheduling. You will hear what complex projects our two guest speakers have been working on lately. Let me introduce you to them. Patrick Boles, Senior Consultant with Deloitte, and Kris Vedat, IT Manager and P&O Logistics. Thanks to the sponsor of this webinar, Deloitte, who apparently has one of the leading global supply chain technology practices. And now we are jumping straight into the discussion moderated by Carl Jeffrey, who co-founded Digital Ship 20 years ago, currently edits Tanker Operator magazine, and writes books on technology in his spare time. Let's get started with your intro, Carl.
Okay, so thank you, Vida. So we're going to get very, very strategic today and a high level in the world of digital technology for shipping. I think I remember in the autumn, we started off talking about project management and managing digital projects at a high level. Then we got more and more technical as the season went on, and probably going to do the same this spring. So first of all, we're going to Dallas in Texas. It's one of the main homes of the oil and gas industry worldwide. And we're going to hear from Patrick Boles, who's the manager of enterprise performance, synchronized planning and fulfillment with Deloitte Consulting. He's from Alabama. So he's going to talk about a project he's done with an oil major to develop digital technology for how it manages marine cargoes globally. So that's managing his oil shipments. So going to hear about a cloud hosting application they built for the trading and shipping business units to collaborate and innovate with. And he's going to talk about how they use supply chain management strategies. So that's something we often hear about in the manufacturing sector, but I've never heard of it being done for tankers before. So that's something very new. It's sort of combining technical and commercial matters, so we get a tanker where we need it for the best rate. And we're also going to talk about how the systems the shipping industry is using can be very flexible and siloized and difficult to optimize. So with so much data being in different spreadsheets and emails, and how that was brought together, give some of the successes and failures of the project. So Patrick looks quite young, but he's actually already had 10 years background as a US domestic barge owner and operator, managing 7 barges and some tugs and 60 to 70 staff on the US Gulf Coast. So after that, we're going to the other worldwide home of the oil and gas industry in the Middle East. And we'll hear from Kris Vedat, who's the head of IT with P&O Maritime Logistics. So Kris is from London, but he's been working with Arab shipping companies since 2001, first United Arab Shipping Company, and then Topaz Energy, and then P&O Maritime Logistics. So they're managing what they say is one of the youngest, most versatile fleets in the offshore support vessel industry, 400 vessels. So that's offshore vessels of all kinds, tug supply vessels, multi-purpose support vessels, crew boats, pilot mooring boats, barges, multi-purpose research vessels. So Kris leads the digital program of the company, and he's going to present a business case about how they used Internet of Things technology along the fleet that got real-time data from the vessel, and how they identified business problems and selected the software and what goals they wanted to achieve. So like usual, we've got questions we can take. If you want to add questions in the Q&A panel, I think we'll have 2 presentations, about 15 minutes each, and then please load up your questions and we'll go through the questions after that. But I'd like to invite Patrick to start giving your talk. Cheers, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Carl and Veda. And thank you to everyone for letting us convince you to join what is likely another Zoom meeting on a calendar full of them. Are you guys able to see my screen okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Perfect. Okay, so looking forward to everyone's participation in this discussion, where I'll be briefly touching upon some findings and considerations sort of observed during the delivery of different maritime technologies within a project setting, and based on some recent work we've done at Deloitte, how some of the world's largest oil and gas companies, Fortune 50 type enterprises, are elevating their digital maturity in and around the maritime domain. And then lastly, based on my experiences in these projects, provide some general commentary through what I see as the 3 key dimensions. That's people, process, and technology. But before we dive into the meat of the discussion, I just want to quickly supplement the lovely intro that Carl and Beta provided and give some background on who I am, what my role is at Deloitte, etc. And so again, my name is Patrick Boles, a supply chain consultant out of Dallas, Texas. I'm one of the leaders of our shipping and ports group that provides professional services, including technology implementations to the deep sea and broader maritime industry, including bulk carriers, container, port authorities, et cetera, et cetera. And as Carl mentioned, prior to joining Deloitte in 2018, I worked as a owner and operator of inland barges and coastal barges in liquid trade on the US Gulf Coast. And so what we want to focus on, or what I want to focus on today, and what this slide shows are two overviews of two case studies for projects that I've had the pleasure of working on over the past 12 to 24 months, where these major oil and gas players are dealing with a myriad of issues related to how they manage their marine logistics planning and execution, and it sought out Deloitte's assistance in developing and implementing solutions to address pain points and capture value related to these processes. And we'll come to see here in just a moment that they sort of went about it in two, I would say, completely opposite fashions, but both are widely viewed by their respective organizations as one of the most successful and influential implementations they've had in recent history. I do want to be clear, though, that these aren't exactly like-for-like projects, and the goals and objectives were slightly different, although both are tied directly to tanker scheduling, chartering, voyage management, and the demerge and financial settlement activities by these organizations. So looking at case study one, this was a in-house build using agile methodologies. It was an oil and gas super major that uniquely has two separate business units that are responsible for the end-to-end management of marine cargoes. We're talking about over $2 billion in annual marine freight spend managed on user-developed spreadsheets that required all of these roles to manage their own spreadsheets, pass them back and forth, exchange an excessive amount of email. There's a lot of redundant data entry, issues with document storage, just really the telltale signs of an organization that is not digitally mature. And all of this resulted in a lot of suboptimal vessel planning and execution. After engaging Deloitte, we kicked off this program utilizing the agile process and a user-centric sort of design thinking approach to build a custom cloud solution on the Salesforce platform that provided a workspace and engagement layer for all of the roles involved in these processes across both business units to collaborate and work together from and replace ultimately their individually Excel spreadsheets. Using the agile approach, we rolled out our first MVP in under 14 weeks of development time. So that's the first case that we'll double click into in just a second. And then the second is a little bit more of the traditional, I would say, implementation approach where the chemicals group for another oil and gas super major, again, managing hundreds of millions in freight spend via spreadsheets, emails, phone calls, identified that they had issues with planning and optimization, contract management, spend visibility, and sought out technical solutions to these problems. Engaged Deloitte, and we did a selection phase where we evaluated 4 different vendors, ultimately landing on what we determined as the best in breed and sort of one true fit for purpose marine transportation management system, which many of you might be familiar with, as I know it's utilized by a lot of ship owners, and that's Best in Nautical's IMOS platform. After the vendor selection, we did utilizing the traditional sort of waterfall approach. We did a 3-month global design, followed by 9 months of build and implementation, allowing us to execute a complex and global deployment that spanned the Americas, Europe, Asia Pacific in just under a year. So double clicking into that first case study that was utilizing agile processes and was an in-house design and build between the client and Deloitte of a cross-functional marine scheduling platform utilizing the Salesforce technology. Started with an interview and assessment phase where we engaged roles across both of those business units, across commodity sectors and across regions to really assess existing processes, technology, and then really start identifying what the key pain points, opportunities for improvement were, et cetera, et cetera. The next phase, and what I really viewed as the critical phase in this overall program, was the design workshops where we did a pain point prioritization, going through all of the data that we compiled through the interview process and really honed in on what that ideal future state was and how those pain points were prioritized within there. We then had a workshop to take those pain points and, in the terms of the system technology, refine them into build-ready user stories that developers could then act on and build the solution out. At the conclusion of that, we commenced the next phase 3, our first program increment, which included 4 Scrum teams, again dispersed globally. This included business stakeholders in the Americas, in Europe, and in Asia, along with development resources in India from Deloitte to build this best-in-class application. There was 40 million in identified savings over a 3-year run rate, and currently the program is on target for its 20 million savings goal. Just some of the capabilities of the tool: robust amount of workflow automation. There is the ability to utilize third-party enterprise apps, document storage capabilities. Previously, the business was using Outlook folders to manage all of the documents and things related to these marine cargo movements. And those of you in the industry know that there's a robust amount of documentation that has to get managed. And so that was a big thing. And then, of course, Salesforce has what we consider a sort of modern suite of collaboration tools that let all of these roles work together. And just as in terms of the value levers, the visibility to all of these cargoes and commodity trading details is really what helped drive the business case. Quickly looking at the people, process, and technology considerations. Just want to run through these really fast. Be slow and then sudden. I know a lot of other previous speakers have talked about how important planning is, and I just want to reemphasize that. And then when I say then sudden, Elon Musk has talked about technology, when correctly developed, is indistinguishable from magic. I think what your project's goal should be is to really show users some of that magic and give them that wow factor to really keep them enticed with the project. Just a couple other things to point out. When you're using the agile processes, it's really more about speed and getting product out there so you can learn from the work that you've done. You don't want to polish the cannon, so to speak. And so that's what this last bullet refers to. Be okay with making crap. It's how you learn. So then double clicking into the second case study, the traditional sort of buy approach that utilized the waterfall methodology. We did the selection phase of 4 vendors, completing a complete business requirements review, a detailed design and build phase where we refined the requirements, thought about the to-be process flows, and most importantly, initiated change management activities. And then lastly, the implementation phase, where we conducted extensive UAT, a lot of training sessions, which are crucial, and then ultimately coordinated the rollout of the application. And what's not shown here is that there is a fourth phase to this program called Sustain and Improve that I also believe is critical, and that's the sort of hypercare and support of users after the fact. As far as the people, process, and technology considerations for this case study, start early with training once you've made the selection of the tool. There is no such thing as too much training or too much testing in these projects. And also take a holistic view of your relationship with the vendor. Honestly evaluate potential for lock-in, their willingness to support your custom development efforts, and really make every effort to be an influential customer to them, whether that's joining their supplier relations board, you know, and just really crafting your influence on their backlog. And then lastly, sort of shameless plug, you know, what does Deloitte bring to these partnerships? As I mentioned in the intro, we have an employee base of over 200,000 professionals, over 500 of them dedicated solely to the maritime industry. And we have global delivery capabilities, which were, as I mentioned, were critical in the two case studies I discussed. And then lastly, technology alliances, innovation partnerships, whether it's Snowflake, AWS, Azure, Salesforce. We have an experienced set of practitioners fluent in those tools. So I know that was a quick run through, a lot of information. Appreciate everybody's time and look forward to answering any questions.
Wow.
With that, I'll hand it back over to you, Carl.
Oh, well, thank you very much. We'll save the questions till after Chris's talk, but I'm fascinated by your choice of vendors, why you went for Salesforce for the first one, and then why you went for Vesson for the second one. But if we don't get any questions from the audience, I'd love to ask you about that. But we'll go to Kris Vedat next, who's the head of IT at P&O Maritime Logistics in Dubai. So we're going to talk about how we made the digital strategy for 400 offshore support vessels, the goals, reducing fuel costs, operations costs, maintenance costs, then a bit of a deep dive into a maintenance project. So I'd like to welcome Kris to give you a talk. Cheers.
Thanks, Carl. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As Carl said, my name is Kris Vedat. I'm the head of IT for P&O Maritime Logistics. And today I'm going to talk about a digital business case, how we come about, or how we created a digital business case, how we then execute upon it, and how we then measure the success of that project. A lot of people talk about digital and the sake of doing digital. I think it's very important before you embark on any digital project that there's a strong business case in place to ensure the success of the project and to also pivot back to understand why we are doing this project. So in the case of P&O, what we did is we ensured that there was a vision first. So at P&O, we wanted to be the champion provider of marine, port services and logistics solutions to the global offshore industry with profitability in the top quartile. Thereafter, we looked at the digital business values that can be driven from that. And we broke this down into 6 distinct areas. We had operational excellence, cost management, customer satisfaction, people and talent, fleet assets and return on assets, and sales. Thereafter, we identified enabling technologies in order to execute upon these initiatives. And today I want to talk about one in particular, which was operational excellence. And in here, we wanted to ensure we reduce the maintenance cost of our assets and reduce the operational cost of our assets. In doing so, we picked enabling technologies for this. And in this case, we picked IoT, or Internet of Things, sensor technology, and advanced analytics in order to deliver these business value. Before embarking on any digital initiative, it is key, or it's critical, to ensure the prerequisites are in place. We can't deliver a digital initiative without having connectivity, for example, on board the vessels, without having means and methods to capture the data. So it's very important that before we embarked upon our digital strategy and our digital initiatives, we ensured that all the prerequisites were in place beforehand. As part of this, it was key that we had a standardized fleet management system on board to capture key data. And it was important that we had connectivity on board as well to ensure that any data that was captured in the vessel could be transferred shoreside and analysed accordingly. So we implemented an integrated management system, and that allowed us to then take the data off autonomously in real time and allowed us to start benchmarking data and activities and dashboarding that accordingly. If we look at the vessels today, they are far more connected than they were historically. And I still believe moving forward, they'll be further connected in the future. In our instance, it was key that we were going to capture certain data points from the vessel in order to drive the value that we wanted to do in our business case. So on a real-time basis, we're taking telemetric data from the vessels, such as AIS data from position, weather, and draft. We're taking vessel operational data, such as fuel consumption, planned maintenance data, speed of the vessel. We're taking crew data, we're taking cargo data. And in this instance, we wanted to take sensor technology data. We wanted to get real-time data from the equipment on board to look at improving the maintenance of the vessel, looking at the condition-based maintenance and trying to move to a predictive-based maintenance model. And why did we deploy a digital solution? Why did we do this? So there were real life scenarios occurring in our day-to-day operation we wanted to tackle, we wanted to improve upon. In this instance, one of the driving points was that back in 2018, we had a connecting rod go through the engine block on one of our vessels in Saudi Arabia. When we did the root cause analysis of this, we saw that there was undetected water contamination. Even though we've been doing manual lube sampling throughout this period, because of the time frame it takes in order to get the sampling data back, it was too late to detect the problem. And in this instance, the manual sampling didn't indicate any issues. This resulted in high costs for us, where we had to replace the engine. We had to obviously get the engine in quickly because the vessel was on charter. And obviously we lost days of our charter due to the utilisation of the vessel not being available. So with this in mind, we were tasked to find a solution to try and avoid these issues in the future. How can IoT then enable these changes to the maintenance models? So if we look at today, and we take the instance of manual lube oil sampling, sampling is done on a periodic basis. It's done as per the maintenance records. So every 6 to 7 to 8 weeks, lube oil sampling is taken on board the vessel. Then that sample is sent offshore or onshore to be tested in a lab and wait for the results to come back. And this is a cyclical process. With that though, you have the chance of missing the critical point, because between the sampling being taken or sample being taken and getting those results back, you could pass the critical point, and at that stage you're in the exposure zone, because manual sampling is very reactive. Moving to an automatic sampling model enables that to happen real time and becomes more condition based. And then with the analytics, you can then become very much more predictive and then decreasing your exposure to the critical point and just decreasing your exposure overall. Thus, identifying a breakdown before it actually happens and being able to mitigate the risks around that. So now with a real-time sampling model, you're able to identify the breakdown beforehand with a predictive analytic model and then mitigate the repair of cost, the loss of revenue, and the reputational loss. Because your realization point is now advanced. And you're mitigating this point and then reducing the exposure to these elements. Obviously, you still have to perform the maintenance because obviously you're detecting an issue, but it's in a controlled manner, and then you can avoid a critical incident on board the vessel. So how do we use IoT for our assets today? So we use a solution called Vitalix, which was developed by, or we co-developed with Baker Hughes, which enables us to have a complete overview of the fleet and the health of all the assets on board in a real-time manner. It uses alarm-based systems to identify equipment failure and sending alerts to the vessel and to the shoreside team to make sure that we are moving into a reactive model, a predictive model, and moving away from a reactive model. It gives real-time overview of all the equipment on board, and it has now, with its analytics model, the ability to predict failures and avoid breakdowns and downtime. In addition to this, there was a byproduct to this as well, that we were now able to move into what we call a condition-based maintenance model. The system monitors multiple parameters on a real-time basis, such as water dilution, soot, glycol. It detects metal particles to a greater degree than you would do in a lab environment. So not only are we now getting this information in a real-time manner, we're also getting a more accurate result of these parameters. And it allows the crew to see this information in a real-time manner, and also the shoreside technical team to see this as well. So we've improved the quality of our testing, and we've improved the response time of the testing. In addition to this, as another product of the savings that we have now, is that we're now able to move into a condition-based maintenance model. So now, using data from the sensor technology and the analytics model, we now change the lube oil based on data, not based on OEM guidelines and manufacturers' guidelines. We've now seen that we're able to increase the life cycle of the oil over 6 or 7 times than what was originally planned as per the manufacturer's guideline. And this on average is saving us around $22,000 per vessel, just alone by moving to a condition-based maintenance model. So not only are we now able to predict failures, we're able to move into a more cost-efficient model with a condition-based maintenance model for the lube oil. So there was 2 benefits to implementing this solution. Thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to Carl now.
Oh, well, thank you. No, that's fascinating. So I'd like to invite all the audience, if you load your questions in the Q&A. And the theme that comes up to me is a theme that often comes up in our talks, is this mixture between human expertise and systems. So I saw that in both of your talks. I think with Patrick's talk, how you've got a system for allocating tankers to cargoes, but also you want to bring in the human expert somewhere to decide if a ship is suitable and it isn't. And then on Chris's talk, you've got the I guess you've got to be an expert on rotating machinery or that specific engine to know what you're looking at with these lube oil curves and to make the call, or whether to do the maintenance or not. You can't let a computer software do it. So that's the sort of thing that often comes in our talk. I don't know if you have any thoughts to start off with about this kind of bringing human expertise together with digital systems, or do you think we're moving to a world where we can make all these decisions totally by software? Is that something either of you would like to share any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Carl, and I think the goals of both of these projects was to really modify their work such that the human focus going forward is handling exceptional events, right, and innovating in the tool for acute business problems, not the sort of repetitive routine tasks and monitoring and updating the statement of facts times, or sending out these cargo nomination, right? To the extent that you can automate all of that and allow humans to really focus on the value drivers associated with those 10% of edge cases that really require their input. I think that's the direction we see it heading.
Yeah, feel free to turn your cameras on, by the way, Patrick and Chris, if you want, so people can see you. Just put it out.
I would tend to agree with Patrick to some degree. I think the human element will never disappear. Of course it won't. We always need engineers in order to ensure the maintenance of our vessels. That's never going to change. But I do think that the systems, and so I think advanced analytics, I think will have a major or a greater impact moving forward. I think with the greater data that's collected and the greater data sets, then it becomes far more accurate. And I think one thing is that we've seen is it's like a puzzle. So at the moment we're monitoring the lube oil, which is one parameter, okay, or one piece of the puzzle. We have maintenance records. Then you overlay that with vibration analysis. Then you can overlay that with operational sort of engine parameter data, yeah? And then it becomes a more accurate piece, it becomes a more accurate picture. And I think that's when you get the true value, and we become far more insightful and accurate than we are today. I think it's building that puzzle out. I think it's not just one piece, it's multiple pieces. And I do think it will take away a lot more insight than we have today. Like a good example, like I said, is the manual lube sampling. Yeah, it takes, on average, probably 4 weeks to turn that around, between taking the sample, getting it offshore, onshore, getting the results back. In that time frame, a lot can happen, and it's moving to a more real-time analytic model. That's the key.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's incredibly difficult. The more sophisticated these systems get to align. I'm doing an article with Lloyd's Register on condition monitoring, where he has to let the client decide when the maintenance intervals are, but the client doesn't know how to configure the software. So then he's got to make the software easier to configure in it, I guess. But that's the road we're all on by the sound of it, isn't it? I think.
The chicken and the egg type of problem, right? And you have to, as an enterprise, when you're thinking about deploying these types of solutions, you really got to focus on what competencies you have in your organization and whether you're going to develop them or hire them in so that you can really take full advantage of the tools you're implementing.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, we've got a couple of questions come up here if you'd like to open the Q&A box. So we've got one vote for Shane Biggie's question for Kris. It's getting a bit technical. What is the time frame to fit the engine room with IoT to run Vitalix? I don't know what Vitalix is. Is that something you mentioned, or is that something you can answer?
That's the solution we deployed on.
Oh, right. Okay.
So time frame, if memory serves me correctly, it's about 2-day fit out. But it all depends on the number of the number of equipment that you're going to monitor. So obviously we're monitoring, off the top of my head, 9 pieces of equipment on average per vessel. So it all depends on the number of pieces of equipment that you're going to be installing upon. But in our instance, it was an average 2 days. They're not wireless, and there are reasons for that, because obviously the sensors are being deployed in the engine room and you can get interference from wireless transmission. I know some vibration analysis or some vibration monitoring tools have some wireless connectors, but in this instance we didn't. What type of sensor device do you recommend? Is it wireless? We have multiple sensors on board the vessel. We have particle sensors, for example. They are manufactured by Baker Hughes, so they're proprietary sensors that have been deployed.
Okay, and then KK Tan, I think he's referring to that first slide where you showed these enormous targets, but I don't know if that connected to the second part of your presentation. You weren't actually explaining how to achieve 5% lower fuel costs, were you? I don't think it was.
No, so the digital business case was multiple, if you reference the slide, there were multiple business case, or there were multiple objectives within that business case. And yes, one of them was in relation to fuel efficiency. Yes, we have been doing that. So we've been doing that by deploying fuel monitoring solutions on board. We've been now looking at, we're now working on route optimization. So we're now targeting route optimization for cargo delivery within the rigs to reduce the fuel spend by looking at the route and also the speed that you're traveling between the various assets. So that's another project that I didn't speak about today, but that's something that we're working on and actively doing today.
Well, maybe you'd like to take Viga's question at the bottom while we're on to sensors. This often comes up in our webinars. There must be enormous problems companies are having working out how to connect everything together. But how do you mitigate transmitting across steel to get the sensor data to the vessel local area network?
So in our instance, we've done hard cabling. So that was the safest or the most efficient manner of doing it. We have data hubs sitting within the vessel, within the engine room, and they're hardwired to the data hub. That's the most efficient and the only way it's really going to work effectively.
Oh, okay. So if we go to Patrick, so you just answered this question on type, but maybe we'll do it out loud. What makes maritime different to the other consultancy areas Deloitte works in, from your perspective?
Right. Yeah. So 2-part answer, I guess. The first was the systems landscape in maritime is disparate, right? There are so many different technologies and solutions available and all these different use cases that they, of course, address. And having the comprehensive technical expertise that we do, I think, really plays a part in our maritime projects. And the second is maritime is unique, of course, in its vernacular and its processes and things, but just in the massive amount of coordination an end-to-end cargo move on a tanker requires between both internal and external stakeholders. There's a lot of business processes that need to be understood there, and bringing our expertise to bear there is, I think, the other key point.
Wow, I think Paul Nevin's remark, I think he's sort of summarizing, talking about the you can't rely on the system, you still need people to make it work in the end, but the just-in-time purchase and ships works on some things, but not all things. I guess it comes to where he started off with this people versus machinery question. I guess we have to get them all working well together, I suppose.
Bring them in harmony. Yeah, I think that needs to be the objective. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. So can we come back to your choice of software then, Patrick? So I was fascinated by this. So Salesforce, I know them as customer relationship management, but I've heard about them doing all kinds of other things. And they have this low code side of thing. You picked
precisely.
It. Yeah.
So I think the key distinction and why that client in particular elected to go that route rather than choosing Vesson, which again, they may choose Vesson down the road or what have you. They're not exactly like for like. But when we started the project, right, there was no, we sort of left it open-ended on what platform we were ultimately going to choose. There was no even sort of firm decision that a technology implementation would address, the pain points and opportunities we would uncover. But after going through all of that, the client felt that Salesforce's sort of low-code environment and the ability to access all these different business apps through their app exchange, right? There's all these different providers that look much like your app store on your phone, and that allowed their business to really build a digital foundation that they can continue to innovate upon, rather than buying one solution that addresses one set of problems that may be here today but gone tomorrow, and now you're stuck in a legacy system. They really felt like it was more about choosing an innovation platform for the future rather than choosing a system to address one specific set of requirements at a point in time.
Oh, so would you recommend Salesforce low code for other areas in shipping, like maybe even maintenance management, if it's so flexible? And
I would certainly evaluate it as an option. Yeah.
Wow,
again, I think there's a lot of great off-the-shelf tools that if they address all the needs and it makes sense, right? I think every sort of business case is unique, but I would certainly consider it as an option.
Wow, and then for client two, you chose between Vison and then these two massive companies, Oracle and SAP, and another one I don't remember, but I was Vison versus you're going for the small specialist, marine specialist company rather than the giant
it was
one.
really about being fit for purpose there. To my knowledge, Vison is really, in my opinion, the market leader in transportation management for the bulk, liquid and dry market, right? Those other solutions that you mentioned, they said they could, modify and configure their existing tools to the bulk and dry and liquid market and accommodate it for tanker operations. But ultimately, we didn't feel confident in that. And the other thing is that Veson's, professional services and even their developers, they're familiar with the industry. They understand all of the sort of inherent challenges. And yeah, I think it was ultimately the right decision.
The two projects sounded quite similar to me, even though you went a different direction, but I guess it's client choice as well.
The client choice and I would say the personas, the users that were involved were the same, right? We're talking about vessel charterers, cargo schedulers, voyage managers, but I would say the actions and the use cases that we were addressing were slightly different. One was more about collaboration, communication, the Salesforce side, right? Getting everybody working together. And then the other was really more about addressing capability gaps in the organization, contract management, demurrage settlement. I mean, they're doing demurrage calculations and spreadsheets and things, for millions of dollars. That that's madness in my opinion. But yeah, that was the sort of scenarios there.
Well, so there's a question from George Engels. So he wants to ask you if you can pick apart. You must have mentioned $50 million benefit somewhere. So was that better efficiency?
Right. That was the second case that had the 15 million in benefits, and it was across a bunch of different dimensions. It was reduction of base freight and bunker spend. A lot of it was around rebill of loading and unloading demurrage. A lot of it was around accessorial spend and the procurement of third-party service providers, how they manage inspectors and things like that. Right. There was a tremendous amount of waste in the inspector hiring process and spend visibility. They had millions upon millions in spend that they didn't really know where it was going to, right? It was sort of a black hole, and getting visibility into that also drive a lot of the 15 million.
Oh, so situation awareness, I guess that's
precisely. Yeah.
Wow. That also links to what Kris was saying about inspectors, overspending on inspectors. I guess that's maybe you talk about vessel inspectors versus equipment inspectors, but it's the same.
I hope nobody from Intertech is on the call. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. Yeah. So maybe this is a big theme for the whole shipping industry, cutting down on inspection. Maybe that's what we're going to see next. Yeah. Another comment you made, Patrick, I thought was interesting. You said show users magic and give them a wow factor. But I often think this is a bit destructive in the sense that shipping industry itself is very slow moving and doesn't have a wow culture. But when technology has evolved, so maybe it's a problem of technology itself, that the expectations of people are going to be wowed by technology, when maybe we'd be better off going for, I don't know if that's something you...
Well, I think at least in my experience dealing with these sort of personas that I was mentioning, they understand that the latest sort of tools and technologies have yet to be brought to bear in the maritime space. And so to the extent that you can, wow them when you're developing these things or configuring existing off-the-shelf, tools where, I can show a demurrage analyst that, he was previously doing all this work in the spreadsheet, and now based on times that are being, imported directly into the system, he's getting, this estimate, actual demurrage, all those sorts of things that really make their job more enjoyable and let them sort of better realize the value that they're going to deliver to the organization. I think, that gets everybody committed to the project and the endeavor as a whole.
Wow, yeah, transparency. That's a word that comes up to me. So people want to know, I guess, Kris, do you have any thoughts? I mean, that sums up where you're trying to go, I guess. Let people understand what's happening and see better what's going on, so they know that the engine cylinder block is getting corroded with water in the wrong place. And
I think transparency is key. I don't think it's just for us as the operators to have that transparency. I think our clients also want to see that transparency. It's something that traditionally hasn't happened. We've been very closed about that, but I think we're moving into an age now, especially with the recent pandemic, that it's not easy to get vessel inspections now. It's not easy to send surveyors on board. So how can we then enable that in the environment we're in today? So it is providing that level of transparency, providing the data to the clients in the manner they want it, in the time frame they want it, providing clients dashboards on vessel performance, good or bad. It's just being transparent. I think that's the world we're moving into now, and I think COVID certainly has accelerated that. And I don't think it's going to stop. I think it will just get greater as the time goes on. And that's the direction we're certainly going in, is to provide better transparency to our clients, provide better transparency to our shore team. Because if we're in a scenario where we can't get on board, we can't travel, we need to have that transparency.
Oh, Kris, what's your thought on the kind of software packages you like? I mean, without naming any names, but we've heard these three different types. You've got the specialist company like vSON, we've got the giant company like Oracle and SAP, and then we've got the low code like Salesforce, which is a platform to build things on. I don't know, you haven't mentioned anything about software yet, or is that something you like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are a lot of software packages out there, and in the marine industry, I think if we talk about planned maintenance systems, there's probably half a dozen that you would say that are leading. I think the difference is the majority of software is going to a cloud-based model, so it's PaaS-based services, So Salesforce is a good example. It's a cloud-based model. We still work in the, although we're advancing in technology, we still work in an industry where communication isn't as it is on shore. So we still work in times where VSAT is the most common communication platform on board our vessels, and so is FBB. So any software and solutions that we need to deploy on the vessels need to take into consideration low bandwidth, more often than not replication. We talk about edge-based processing, so there's a lot of processing that takes place on board the vessel itself, and then only the critical data is taken to the shore side or moved across. I think traditionally the big players like SAP and Oracle haven't really come to the table in regards to the marine industry. I mean, I come from the line industry, and the liner industry was probably the most advanced, I would say, when it came to systems, because you had container tracking systems, you had documentation modules, and at that point, I think there wasn't any main players that were involved in that process. I think SAP came along late and they were developing a marine-based platform, but I still think it's more a boutique marketplace at the moment.
Yeah, is there any thoughts you have on low code? And I guess you've mentioned that maybe not work on board ships because it needs the cloud, but I mean, we keep hearing about it every now and again when someone says it's this amazing thing around the corner that you could use for nearly everything. But
yeah, I think low code is certainly the way forward. I think there's many players in the market that are doing that. A good example is Microsoft with Power Apps, which is a low code platform system where you're able to develop apps basically from push and play and moving the functions around on the screen. So it's very GUI based function. It's low code. I think it is certainly a trend that's coming out, and I think you'll see. I think certainly again, if I reference COVID, I think we've seen a lot more digital solutions and mobile applications being developed quickly, and low code enables that because you can do quick deployment in the current times to fill a gap. We certainly have been doing that in regards to trying to reduce the manual or the paperwork on board the vessels and move it to a digital format. So we've developed apps, some power apps quite quickly to move away from our manual tasks on board the vessels, to make it easier for the crew on board and to get the data off quicker.
oh, so we've got this comment from Paul Nevins. I just looked him up on LinkedIn. If it's the same Paul Nevins, he's a marine superintendent covering ports, terminals and tankers with Capital Marine in the UK. So he's basically saying that we do need this digital stuff because there's so much often the superintendents can't go to ships. So we'll get more and more reliant on this digital communications. It all needs to work. It's all getting very important. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say about that, or yeah.
Well, I think this is the world we live in nowadays. Travel isn't going to be as easy as it was before. We hope that will change, but at the moment we need to plan and work around that. So it is having a good example is remote surveys. How do we do this? Are we going to use video more? Again, I use the word data. Are we going to use that data in a more constructive manner? How do we get closer to our vessels and our crew, but without physically being closer? And I think that's the key. And I think that's where digital will certainly have a part to play in.
No, there's another comment about not being too reliant on sensors. That also fits with the Boeing Max story. I guess you always need people who know what they're doing with these things, don't you? I guess that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I mean, yes, the human engineer is never going to go away. I mean, we still require that. That's a fact. All of the digital initiatives that anyone embarks upon is there to make the people doing their job easier. It's not to replace it, it's to assist and benefit. And I think if we keep that in mind, then we get the buy-in from the crew, for example. We also then still have that human element involved from a sort of a verification perspective.
Yeah, so if we come back to Patrick, I'm just thinking about the future of tanker chartering based on what you've seen. So we're imagining a world where companies are all getting their tankers as easily as a grocery company organizes their trucks, do you think, where there's barely a person involved? Or
I think maybe that's the light at the end of the tunnel, but I do see the relationship between vessel owners and charters and third-party stakeholders and service providers, whether it's bunker delivery services or crew change services or agents, brokers. I do see a push towards bringing them all into one workspace or platform to allow them to collaborate in a sort of more efficient manner than they are today. Yeah.
Well, Barry would like to ask you about your experience with shipbrokers. I guess you're in Dallas, you're not in London, so you're a long way from the shipbroking community, aren't you?
Right. I think I am in Dallas, but I have dealt with them some. Being, of course, they remain in both case studies that I mentioned for both of those oil and gas clients. Shipbrokers are still, an important part of the process. I think we all realize that current state brokers benefit from, the lack of transparency, and that's counter to many of the objectives that we're trying to achieve here. But there are sort of new business models for them that are appearing as a result of this technology, and I suspect they'll adapt to that going forward. I don't think they're going away, but I think they'll look different in the next 5 years.
Yeah, Barry's saying at the bottom that the brokers have resisted this stuff in the past. I don't know if they're resisting it to the point where they stop you doing what you want to do, or your oil major client is big enough to.
It didn't work out for the Luddites, and I don't suspect it will work out for them either.
It worked out for the last 20 years. It's worked out all right, but yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Oh, very good. Yeah. So Anton Zakharov is asking about, I think that's for you, Kris, about user cases with predictive-based maintenance. I think that's kind of what you presented about the engine and the engine block and the lube oil. Could you predict when we need to change machinery before an accident arrives? I mean, it was kind of like, I suppose, once you know an accident's happened, you can quite easily build a system to stop the same accident happening again. But I guess there's so many different possible accidents, it's quite hard to.
Yeah, so you're measuring multiple parameters. So, you know, quite correctly, we had a use case. That's why we had the digital business case. You know, there has to be key KPIs and objectives of what we're trying to achieve. So there was a use case. And what type of accidents can you predict? Well, based on the parameters that, you know, so for example, it has particle sensors on board. So you can detect the wear and tear of the various components on board in the equipment. You can detect water within the oil. So that's obviously what the use case I presented. So yeah, with that, and then it's not just that enables you to predict the failure, it's the analytics. So then the analytics trends that and then extrapolates that forward. So then it will tell you when, you know, when that will get to a point where a critical failure will take place. So it's a combination of the data that's come in and the analytics models that have been built around it.
Oh, do you want to, so Paul's asking about RealWear, which I've just Googled, that sort of tablet wearable computers. Is that something you've thought of using? Or I guess we haven't really got too far into the sensors, I think, in your talk. With 400 chips, you must have.
So yeah, there is, you know, RealWear out there, and but I think for us, it's using the cameras on board the vessels. I think the next stage that we will see evolution in is in the AR VR world, where you'll use the vessel's cameras that are positioned throughout the vessel to then digitize the area and then start predicting. Well, it's more, we've come up with cases around safety, so ensuring that crew aren't entering areas that they shouldn't be in, looking at the safety around the vessel. That's one of the key areas that we see that area being, or that technology being involved with.
Oh, that's great. Oh, Anton says, in our experience, it's mostly the ship owners that resist the transparency.
I would agree with that statement, but we're certainly trying to buck the trend, I would say, yeah, because I think we feel that's a very old model, one that we don't subscribe to.
I guess your relationships with oil companies are very similar to the tanker sector, aren't they? I suppose so.
Yeah, so we're probably, you know, collaborating with the same guys, yeah. So we feel that that's a better relationship to have and be more of a partner than anything else, and we want to build those relationships with our clients. And I think transparency is one of the key things around that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're just coming to the last few minutes now. So I mean, the sort of summary for me is definitely going to have a more drive for transparency. Always difficult with the issue of domain expertise, but we know we're going in one direction only. That's more and more digital. The sort of specific efficiencies we've talked about is sort of inspection and also demurrage. I'm not sure in the whole tanker chartering there's that much inefficiency. I mean, demurrage is an obvious one, but I don't think there's, unless companies getting better rates. But that's how but I still such enormous amounts of money that any savings are worth it. That's how I would sort of summarize. I don't know if you have any closing words you'd like to make. Do you think? Maybe Patrick, start with you, is it?
Sure. Yeah, I think first off, thanks for everybody for joining and for your questions. And yeah, Carl, as you mentioned, that there's really only one direction this thing is heading, right? It's becoming more digital, and that's borne out in just sort of the demand we've seen from our clients. They've sort of really accelerated their desired pace of increasing digital maturity. So yeah.
Yeah, we're learning what digital maturity looks like, because it hasn't been obvious, I think. Yeah, Kris, do you want to make any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think that I echo the same comments. Yeah, so I think digital is being accelerated due to COVID. I think, again, transparency is key, but I think what is important to maintain is don't embark upon a digital initiative for the sake of embarking upon an initiative. I think it's very important there are strong business cases supporting that, certainly in today's times. There are clear objectives for that business case and the initiative you're embarking upon, because obviously the maritime industry is a very traditional industry, and we sometimes forget about change management, ensuring that we're getting buy-in not only from the shore operations but the crew on board who are our frontline workers, ensuring that they get buy into the initiatives that we're working on, and anything that we do implement aids and assists them and doesn't hinder them in their day-to-day operations.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, I think we've finished on time. Kris told us he's going to play football now, so it's one of the only places in the whole world I think you can play football at the moment. And it's 22 degrees I've just looked up, so I'll just pass back to Vida for the closing words. Cheers.
Thank you, Carl. Also, thanks, Patrick and Kris, for walking us through your projects. Also, thanks, Deloitte, for sponsoring and actually supporting maritime content that we are creating online. Carl and I, we encourage you to join us again on Thursday, and we have a great case study for you, how advanced algorithms can be applied for managing crew and maintenance. Now, Digital Ship is signing off. Take care. Bye.
Oh, bye-bye.